Support Black-owned journalism now more than ever. Black-owned media faces threats and needs our support. Help keep Black voices alive by donating today. Support Black voices today.
Three ways for Black men to reduce their risk for heart disease. Hi, I'm Dr. Marcus St. John, Baptist Health, Miami Cardiac and Vascular Institute. Stop smoking if you smoke, get moving, and know your numbers, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, and your blood cholesterol. If they're not where they need to be, work with your healthcare provider to get them down. Doing these three things will reduce your risk of heart disease.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Let It Be Known. We appreciate you joining us every morning, the Black Press's live morning show. This morning we have a very important show for you this morning, brought to you by the Association of Black Cardiologists. Dr. Fletcher, Anthony Fletcher, will join us shortly to talk about the importance of heart health, particularly in the Black community, where there's a whole lot of misinformation. Of course, we don't, as a whole, participate in clinical trials, but that seems to be changing a bit too. But there's a lot that we need to understand, and there's no better organization than ABC to have on to talk about this important issue of cardiovascular health. And they have several really rich and enlightening and educational talking points, impact areas, if you will, in which it can really, if we just listen, folks, and take serious our heart health, because with just about everything else, Black men and women are disproportionately, that word is always used, right? We always use that word, because it's true. We're disproportionately impacted when it comes to our health, and mostly through no fault of our own. But still, these are things we have to deal with. So we will talk very shortly with Dr. Anthony Fletcher, and believe me, I have spoken to Dr. Anthony Fletcher earlier this month, and it is an absolute treat when you have such a great professional to be able to talk to you about things that matter like this. But first, this morning, we're going to get to a couple of items before we get to Dr. Fletcher. Couple of quick items. What's going on in Washington, D.C. With the situation with Julian Bailey. Take a look at this, folks. This is heartbreaking.
To know what happened to Julian on February 11th. We don't even have a narrative right now from the police. Okay. The police report doesn't even give details about why they shot Julian on that day. Yeah. The community deserves that kind of transparency, and his family deserves that kind of justice. Tell us what happened. If you have nothing to hide, tell us what happened. Because what we know is that the U.S. Marshals, who are not trained to be officers in the field, right, conducting traffic stops, were conducting a traffic stop that day and open fired, killed Julian Bailey.
They need to know. We all need to know. Community members gathered in Southeast Washington, D.C. Of course, Southeast is where the Washington Informer resides. The Washington Informer's headquarters has always been there. And it's predominantly, overwhelmingly, an African-American community. And they gathered to demand answers in the death of Julian Bailey, who's a 43-year-old father who was shot to death earlier this month by U.S. Marshals. Bailey is the third person in the District of Columbia that U.S. Marshals have killed since President Trump's federal law enforcement surge. The surge officially ended last August, but officers from dozens of U.S. agencies remain patrolling the Capitol. Police say that they pursued Bailey after he allegedly threatened a woman at a convenience store and after they rammed his car. They said he approached him pointing a gun. Bailey's family and social justice advocates they have many questions about that. They are disputing that. And so they're demanding the release of all body cam footage. And what kind of gets the community a little uneasy, or they don't, it doesn't help with the trust factor, is when they take forever to release the um, body cam footage, because you start wondering what's going on. Um, so they deserve answers. They absolutely deserve answers in Julian Bailey's case, like all families, and naturally, and I don't know if the family has yet reached out to Black America's Attorney General yet, but generally, Ben Crump gets it moving. He gets things moving. Also, this morning, while the life-saving work of emergency medical technicians, or EMTs, is seen as vital in communities across the country, few Americans likely know it was Black Americans who revolutionized the profession. A new bill introduced by Representative Summer Lee of Pennsylvania wants to shed light on this little known history. It's Black History Month. And every time we keep finding out, Black folks are just responsible for every invention, isn't it? Aren't they? Well, she wants to shed light on the little known history of the Freedom House Ambulance Service, America's first EMT service, and the innovative Black leaders who made it happen. She said Black communities were not being served when there was an emergency. There was no one to take care of them, to get them to the hospital. There was no pre hospital care, no urgent care. People were dying, Representative Summer Lee said. Her bill wants to award the now defunct Freedom House with a Congressional Gold Medal to be displayed, laid out at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Back in 1965, the Freedom House Ambulance Service became the first emergency medical service in the U.S. to be staffed by paramedics with medical training beyond basic first aid. It was originally known as Freedom House Enterprises, which was founded to provide economic stimulation in the city of Pittsburgh in Allegheny County. Specifically, those in the predominantly Black Hill District were a majority of the residents, and they fell well below the poverty line. So it wasn't like they could freely just call an ambulance anyway. And not that ambulances were coming in freely into Black neighborhoods. The goal of Freedom House Enterprises was to create job training and employment opportunities for residents, and to provide training and employment opportunities for those who were deemed unemployable, I should say, by the city welfare offices. You know, the welfare wanted to keep people on welfare. Well, in 1965, Philip Halen, who was president of the Maurice Falk Medical Fund and a former ambulance driver and chairman of the OEO Health Community, he had the idea of creating a transformative, this is a rough morning, isn't it, folks? A transformative model that would bridge the gap. He was joined by a group of individuals in medicine, and they began training medics for what would eventually become a revolutionary service for the Pittsburgh community and later the entire nation. And these were not doctors, they were not medical professionals, they were just people, particularly men who were underemployed. And they say, we have worn black men especially have worn the label of not wanting to work or whatever. Give me a break. These forefathers, if you will, they paved the way in so many ways, not just in the paramedic industry, but this shows you, hey, if you either make a way or find a way. And that's what they did, folks. They made a way. They found a way to make a way. So good on them. All right, folks. Our next segment. Been looking forward to this conversation. Um, it is the work of the Association of Black Cardiologists, or ABC, because heart disease is still the number one killer in America. But for Black Americans, it has never been just a medical issue. It has been a matter of access, a matter of geography, a matter of whether someone listens when we say something doesn't feel right. And, February is Black History Month, yes, but it is also Heart Health Awareness Month. And while cardiovascular deaths have declined overall in this country, Black Americans continue to die at higher rates from heart disease, stroke, heart failure, and complications from hypertension. We're talking about high blood pressure that develops earlier in life, most severe disease, or more severe disease, higher rates of diabetes and obesity, misdiagnosis, of course, and what doctors now call a cardiology desert. Entire regions where millions of Black Americans have little to no access to cardiology. Well, the Association of Black Cardiologists was founded in 1974 to confront exactly this stuff. Now, 50 some odd years later, the organization includes more than 2,000 health professionals worldwide, and its mission is pretty clear: to eliminate the disparities in cardiovascular disease and improve outcomes in communities of color. Well, this year, ABC didn't just talk about awareness, they acted. More than 30 screenings and educational events across the country were held. LDL-C cholesterol screenings, provider education, a cardiovascular desert initiative targeting Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas, and a message that should not require a calendar month to hear. And that is, know your numbers, folks. Know your blood pressure. Know your cholesterol. Know your risk. Dr. Anthony Fletcher is the 20th president of the Association of Black Cardiologists and an interventional cardiologist who has spent decades treating patients in Arkansas. He sees the numbers, he sees the gaps, he sees the lives that could be saved with earlier detection and better access. Dr. Fletcher, how are you this morning?
I'm tremendous. Good morning, and thank you for this introduction. You've taken most of my talk. You've given all of the statistics and talked about cardiovascular disease. It's also warming to hear that I'm not the only person who sometimes has a hard time getting the day started. So it's so great to see you this morning.
Well, Dr. Fletcher, for the listeners meeting you for the first time, tell them who exactly are you and what does your role with the Association of Black Cardiologists involve?
Well, thank you. So I'm an interventional cardiologist. That is a subspecialty in the field of cardiology that essentially works with people with heart attacks. We look at diagnostic and workup and interventional aspects of hardening of the arteries. We open arteries in many cases with devices inclusive of stents. We do structural repairs of heart valves and aortas. We work on peripheral vascular disease, which is the buildup of cholesterol in our legs. And then we also do general cardiology in many cases, heart failure, atrial fibrillation, other arrhythmias. So it's a broad spectrum. I've had the privilege to do this for the last 40 years here in the state of Arkansas with my partner, Dr. Jill Hargrove, and Dr. Francis Harris, and Dr. Stephen Broughton. And we just had the privilege to take care of a diverse population of individuals with a special focus and emphasis on people who are underserved and marginalized.
And doctor, what's the most common misconception people have about heart disease?
I think the most common misconception is it's not going to happen to me. And that in the past, although it's improving, there was some strong components that Black people didn't have heart disease. But we've certainly proven that wrong, no question, by looking at statistics that you even quoted today.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just to reiterate, tell folks again about the Association of Black Cardiologists and what is its mission in communities across the country.
So the Association of Black Cardiologists is an organization that just recently turned 50 years old. It was formed by our founder, Dr. Richard Allen Williams, and 17 other pioneering cardiologists who got together at an American Heart Association meeting and decided that they didn't have the representation on the speakers' platforms They weren't hearing information that perhaps was directly pertaining to their patients, and even issues in terms of the problems that they faced as practitioners. So these early pioneers got together and formulated the Association of Black Cardiologists, which essentially is dedicated to the mission of taking care of cardiovascular disease and underrepresented populations to decrease the potential and treat people with heart attacks and strokes. And we've been dedicated for that mission now on our 51st year to make sure that we have equal access to evidence-based medicine, that we have instructions and education about prevention, knowing our risk factors, early presentation, and that we are appropriately evaluated when seen and evaluated. So it's an
Yeah,
organization that not only is a conglomeration of physicians, but also non-physicians. You don't have to be Black to be in the Association of Black Cardiologists. You just have to have that vision that you want to be sure that all people have access to cardiovascular care.
yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about symptoms, what are the consequences, doctor, of waiting until symptoms appear?
Well, unfortunately, when symptoms appear, often that means that the disease process has advanced to a point where now there's been some structural damage or some sort of manifestation that's limited your quality of life. If you look at a fire, initially when it starts, you may not see anything, then you see a little smoke. The longer that you wait until that fire progresses and now you see flames, obviously your options to minimize the damage and put it out have been somewhat decreased. And so cardiovascular disease and many other disease entities are very much like that. So that's important that we get screened so that we know our risk factors. You mentioned earlier about our numbers, that we address those numbers once they've been identified. So the sooner you get there, the more options that we have for prevention, the more options we have for early detection, and the better options we have for treatment and better outcomes.
Yeah, that slogan on your website says every heart counts. Could you just expand on that just a little bit?
So every heart count basically goes back to the mission and the vision of ABC. You know, whether you're female, whether you're male, whether you're Black, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Asian, Asian American, Native Americans, white, those hearts are all important. We all have cardiovascular disease potentials and we all should be treated appropriately and aggressively. And we all should have that opportunity to live long and fruitful lives without the symptoms and problems of cardiovascular disease and stroke.
Yeah, and Dr. Fletcher, heart disease, as I mentioned in the intro, heart disease deaths have declined nationally, but Black Americans still die at higher rates. What is driving the gap today?
Well, I guess some additional information, although initially heart disease deaths have been decreasing, recently we've seen an upswing in general across the population. And we're attributing that to many factors, inclusive of more obesity, more diabetes, and certainly hypertension. In the African American community, those three entities are more prevalent. And so certainly we're seeing an increase in the deaths in African Americans. That gap persists because, number one, of those three major risk factors being more prevalent in the African American population. Number two, we're not presenting early. We don't know those risk factors. I think you alluded earlier to the fact that hypertension occurs much earlier in African Americans. We can see individuals in their early teens with hypertension that often is not diagnosed and treated. And so hypertension is a major driver for why we see this gap. It puts us at higher risk for heart attacks and strokes, higher risk for heart failure, and higher risk for renal failure. And so that's one of the major reasons. Access, to preventive care is a big issue. Lack of insurance. And we talk about those social determinants of health, and they play a major role. Where you live, your housing, the access to healthy foods, the access to insurance so that you're able to afford preventive care. And even when it's time to be treated with medications, again, being able to afford sometimes the evidence-based medicines can be a challenge. And distance is an issue. As we talk about with the
Yeah.
Cardiovascular Desert Initiative, sometimes many individuals have to follow as much as 80 miles or travel as much as 80 miles to get to see a specialist. Now, primary care providers are important. You don't always have to see the cardiologist. Initially, having access to primary care physicians, nurse practitioners, physicians assistants is also vital. And in many cases in our communities, we don't have primary care providers either.
Yeah, and I want to talk just a little bit more about cardiology deserts. But first, all of what you mentioned, is it talk about lifestyle? Some people say it's just a lifestyle, but it's isn't it more than that? Isn't it more about systemic access and structural barriers?
Well, certainly lifestyle plays a role in the development of cardiovascular disease to some degree. There are some genetic components. Obviously, if your parents and grandparents have had, hypertension and history of heart disease, certain forms of cholesterol abnormalities, and certain potentials for cardiomyopathies in terms of inheritable things that can happen to your heart muscle, then that certainly starts you off at a disadvantage. But then lifestyle, to potentiate those risk factors, it plays a role. What we eat plays a huge role. We
Hmm.
many times have diets that are full of fats and cholesterol and sugar, and that plays a significant role. That's a beginning for the development of cardiovascular disease. Activity levels, those of us who are more sedentary and we're not active, that plays a role. Being over ideal weight or obesity, if we want to use that term, is a major risk factor. Many people think it's a cosmetic issue, but obesity plays a key role in your potential to develop various aspects of cardiovascular disease, inclusive of heart failure, inclusive of arrhythmias, inclusive of blood clots. And so obesity plays a tremendous role. And so our lifestyle, being active, each of us should get at least 150 minutes of exercise per week. Those are just national guidelines and directives that when the body is active, you're less likely to be hypertensive, you're less likely to be overweight. Your sugars are perhaps going to be in better control or preventive for diabetes, and your good cholesterol will be higher. So our lifestyle plays a key role. And then again, social habits, let's not leave those out. Smoking is a no-no. I mean, that is a
Hmm.
major number one trigger for cardiovascular disease that we can't control. And then social drugs, that is certainly not a uh, um, a good habit to have in terms of putting you at higher risk for cardiovascular disease. And drugs inclusive of that would be nicotine. We often isolate, tobacco or smoking, but nicotine is a drug, and that is again a major aspect of putting you at higher risk for cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, and again, when you talk about deserts, cardiology deserts, what does that mean in real human terms? What happens to patients who live in those areas?
Well, cardiovascular deserts is certainly our campaign that we're looking at, and we define, and it's been defined by others as areas where you have limited to no cardiologists available. A limited meaning that the ratio of patients to cardiologists is such that your accessibility to see a cardiologist is somewhat limited, and obviously, no cardiologist means there's no cardiologist there. These deserts are geographically defined by the United
Hmm.
States. And unfortunately, we don't have a slide we can show today. But for you sports fans out there, essentially it looks like the Southeastern Conference. It's the Mid South, Deep South, and the Southeastern portion of the United States. Now, there are isolated pockets throughout the rest of the country where there are deserts. These deserts can be intercity. You mentioned, Washington, D.C., which is a city that I lived in for several years. There are deserts within Washington, D.C., in the outlying areas. The rural areas throughout this country are areas where these deserts exist. Now, very interesting, if you look at the demographics of where most people of color, specifically Black people, live, the highest concentration of the Black population is in the areas of these cardiovascular deserts, this mid South, southeastern portion of the United States. And of course, there are historical reasons as to why those areas are more inundated with Black people. But those are the areas of the desert. Those desert areas are also important because that's where you also see the higher prevalence of those three factors again, hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. And so that's what we mean by the desert, an area where you don't have the appropriate access to cardiovascular care. And you can superimpose on that food deserts also. also kind of correlate with that
Yeah.
distribution.
Yeah, there are just too many of those we do know, and this is enlightening because a lot of people, when we think about deserts, if you will, we don't tend to think about cardiovascular cardiology deserts. So that's this is real informative, Dr. Fletcher. ABC just wrapped up a month-long campaign of events. Give us the picture, the big picture. What did you guys do, and what exactly was the goal?
Well, the big picture obviously was that, February is Heart Month, and also February is Black History Month. And we just sat back and thought about, this campaign of the deserts has been going on for quite some time now, but we thought this would be a great time to highlight this and to have interviews like this as often as possible to get the word out to all of America about the importance of cardiovascular deserts, the importance of cardiovascular care, prevention. And, we specifically started off this desert campaign looking at the bad cholesterol LDLC. But this
Mhm.
desert campaign is more than just that. It's about making sure that we bring education to the members of the communities in these deserts, that we bring education to the providers. Not that they're not educated and knowledgeable, but many times they're not up to speed with the recent guidelines and the desire or the need, I should say, to treat aggressively, in this case, LDLC, the bad cholesterol. And so to share that information to them in terms of uh, in live, in person presentations when possible, and usually virtual. Even programs like this can be very educational for community members as well as the providers.
Yeah, and how many cities or sites did you reach?
Well, the pilot program of the desert starts off with 4 states, and those states were Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And our host cities were, of course, the appropriate cities in those states: Atlanta for Georgia, Jackson for Mississippi, New Orleans for Louisiana, and Little Rock for Arkansas. We use those cities because we have a large number of cardiologists who are members of the Association of Black Cardiologists in those states. And they know their states, they know the demographics, they know the politics. And in many cases, they have people in these remote areas that they know, or patients that they've received from these areas. And so we're working with trying to establish trusted individuals in these communities. I think that's why this is so unique. When people hear from people that they know and they trust and they have relationships, they're more likely to listen to the message as opposed to outsiders coming from remote areas that they don't know. So we've even looked at partnering with the mayors of these communities. Obviously, they're trusted individuals. They've been elected and they know the layouts of these areas and these communities. We're talking about small cities where you may have 100 people or less sometimes. And so
Mhm.
these are the areas where this is where these individuals live. We want to be inside the communities, as they say often. We want to go to where people live and where they are. And so that's sort of the nature. Now, the media campaign is spread throughout all of these states and even outside of the desert. It's just been beautiful to
Right.
watch that map. That ability, like this broadcast today, is throughout the course of the United States. And so it's important that the message is available to everybody because, again, these risk factors exist for everyone. And so even if you're not in the desert, heeding the potential of getting early access and knowing your numbers and treating those numbers is an important message for everyone.
Yeah, and what's the response been like? I know that certainly Black Americans, we as a whole, as I said earlier, we tend not to have a whole lot of trust in the medical community, and it extends to when someone like ABC comes into the neighborhood or whatever, we kind of hesitate. Okay, what's this about with our health thing? We tend to shy away from that because of historically what's happened to Black Americans in this country when it comes to healthcare. So what's the response been like? And are you still finding some of those uh, barriers where folks just Black folks in particular saying, "Hey, I just don't trust it."
Well, the response, the accumulation of the data is ongoing, so I really can't give you a strong number. But when we look at the hit on our media outputs, we've had millions and millions of people. One of the particular numbers that we looked at, we had 141 million hits on that site. I mean, many people were coming
Well,
back.
that's quite a response, Dr.
Yeah,
Fletcher.
since there are more hits than we have people in the United States, but people come in and read a little bit, come back, read a little bit. So we're excited about that. Obviously, as time goes on, we'll be able to calculate those numbers, and as we go out and do some of the early screenings and we get returns on those numbers, we'll be able to go back. This cardiovascular desert, this is not a one and done campaign. This is not just
Oh
Heart
no.
Month. This is ongoing, and as we look at this. For instance, as I mentioned before, we're starting off with LDLC. This is funded in part by Amgen, but we're going to be looking at other things: hypertension, diabetes, maternal mortality, women's health, obesity. All of those things can be interchanged in the desert. These are areas that need all of those particular entities addressed. So I think this is ongoing. Perhaps, maybe a couple years from now, we can have this interview and I can tell you X number of numbers, and, we can even look at, how things have been impacted. You
Right.
started off, your cholesterol numbers were X and now they're Y. And the ultimate goal and hope is that we can sit back a few years from now and say, hey, that gap has been closed.
Right.
Now African Americans have just as much cardiovascular disease as non-African Americans, and obviously the goal would be for people not to have cardiovascular disease at all. But obviously that's a major dream. But essentially, that's the goal. That's how we will measure the outcome. That people are presenting early. And again, there are a lot of factors involved. Insurance is key. I mean, you don't present if you don't have money to pay for your care. There are free
Yeah.
clinics and things out there, and that's important. But again, I think we have to have accessibility. Insurance, we have to have available providers to see these individuals. When appropriate, you have to have the mechanisms to refer to cardiovascular specialists. And that brings up another point I want to stress. One of the
Oh yeah.
missions of ABC is, diversification of the workforce and making sure that there are more providers that look like the patients that they serve. Because many times there's more of a trust factor there. There's communication skills that sometimes are very helpful in terms of bringing out salient points of the patient's history. And there's data that shows us that there's more compliance with therapy if the provider is able to relate to the patient and the patient can relate to the provider. So those are key. You mentioned earlier about research. Less than 3% of African Americans are included in a lot of the clinical trials. So we want to see those numbers bolstered. The trialists, the researchers, we want to increase the number of trialists that look like the patients that we're going to use these outcomes for. So that's another mission of ABC. I mean, we're working to enhance the workforce. We have student development programs. We do student retreats where we bring students in the high school level and teach them about cardiovascular disease and expose them to some of the technology. We have scholarships in many cases for medical students. We have fellowships that we're developing. We work very heavily with a lot of our industrial and pharmaceutical partners to make this about. So I think this is key. This is what ABC is about. That's why this organization is so dynamic and so very important, we think, to the cardiovascular health of all Americans.
Yeah, and again, folks, we appreciate you joining in. ABC is kind enough to give us this information, sponsor this segment with Dr. Fletcher. We really appreciate it. Dr. Fletcher, prevention. Let's talk about prevention some more because, as you said earlier, once those symptoms hit, the fire's already started. We want to prevent the fire from happening. So let's get a little practical. Know your numbers as you mentioned, but which numbers matter most, and what should people do if they don't know their numbers?
Well, I'll start with the last question first.
Mhm.
If you don't know your numbers, you should get access to get those numbers. It doesn't always mean that you have to go to the doctor's office. You could go to some of the ambulatory healthcare centers, but obviously you'd like to have a primary care provider. But you need to know, your blood sugar, your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your weight. Those are key numbers that you need to know. And then after you know those numbers, be sure you understand what those numbers mean. A lot of people say, oh, my blood pressure is fine. What is it? Oh, it's 150 over 90. Well, that's that's hypertensive. Your pressure should be 130 over 80 or lower, and ideally 120 over 80. So knowing those numbers, then reacting to those numbers. Ask your providers when you go, what are my numbers? Many times, unfortunately, the providers will say, oh, your numbers are fine. Well, what are they? Do you know what they are? And
Right.
sometimes, people have different ideas, even providers, as to what's fine. Cholesterol is another example of that. Many times the number should be interpreted not only in terms of the absolute value, but what are your risk factors? Are you diabetic? Then the cholesterol number should be even lower. Have you had a previous cardiac event or cardiac procedure? Then the number should be lower. So it's important that we know those numbers and that we modify those numbers. I think it's important too, and my personal bias is that every household should have a blood pressure cuff,
Hmm.
because you can measure those numbers yourselves and know
Is
those.
there is there a recommended cuff
No,
brand or anything?
there's no recommended brand or cuff. I think the most important thing, I always personally prefer that you get the one that goes around the arm rather than the wrist. They're more accurate, in my experience. I think it's important that you get something that's basic and simple. You don't have to buy the most expensive one with all the bells and whistles. At the same time, you shouldn't get the cheapest one. They're available, at various drugstores and various retailers online. I think it's important that you do that. So there's no particular brand, but I think it's just important that every household should have access to a blood pressure cuff. The other thing too, while we're on that subject, is I think everyone, as many people as possible, should know CPR
Okay.
because again, cardiac arrest can occur and it's more common. The outcomes are less likely to be of good outcomes in African Americans for many reasons. But again, knowing CPR, the sooner you can get circulation established, the better outcomes that we have. And so I think those are just important things that every household should be aware of: blood pressure cuffs and knowing CPR.
And when we talk about checking and knowing your numbers, where can someone, healthcare is outrageous today, the cost, but where can someone get checked affordably? And how often should they check their adults anyway, check their blood pressure?
Well, blood pressure should be checked on a routine basis. Obviously, if you have hypertension, we ask a lot of people to check their pressures daily. If you're healthy, periodically you should just check your blood pressure. And then everybody should have screenings at least once a year. Let's just see their primary care physician for just routine maintenance. On the other hand, if you have active problems, clearly you see your physicians a little bit more frequently. You should weigh yourself on a regular basis. Again, also to kind of keep an idea of, where your weight is, whether it's going up, going down. And again, we talked about exercise. That's extremely important. These are just sort of maintenance things that you should do. Many times there are federally qualified healthcare centers that help see patients on a sliding scale in many cases for fees. I think that's another potential. And then again, just knowing your primary care physician, you should certainly kind of work with the people in your community. Many times, providers are flexible in terms of seeing patients. Again, that I might be pushing that a little bit, but there are some good physicians out there who certainly do their best to accommodate individuals. But I think the early prevention is key. The early presentation is key. Don't wait until something is symptomatic to the point where you just can't stand it anymore, and that's when you present.
Yeah, and hypertension, of course, this is a major focus. We're talking about it this morning. What are the fastest, most realistic lifestyle changes that move blood pressure in the right direction?
Well, again, back to the basics, diet and exercise. What we consume is very often in this country laden with salt. I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
of salt hitting and things. We think, oh, the salt shaker is all I need to worry about. No, foods have salt. Canned soups and vegetables and things are basically processed and stored in salt. So you should eat more fresh and frozen. A lot of your cured meats, sausage, the bacon, the ham, again, there's salt as that curing process.
Mm.
Simple things like dill pickles and olives, again, they're very salty. You see people sometimes eating pickles like they're a piece of fruit. And again, that's salt stick. Fast foods, obviously,
Yeah.
In many of our deserts, one of the things that you see is that, a lot of times the food's coming from these quick convenience stores, and you have fried fish and fried chicken and fried potatoes, and so again, those are full of saturated salts and fats, and so I think we have to be careful there. Um, just things such as condiments, simple things like ketchup and barbecue sauce and Worcestershire sauce and salad dressings. Again, you should pay attention. Doesn't mean you can't use them, but obviously use them in smaller quantities very often. So our foods are full of salt, and so I think we have to look at the labels, read the labels. I'm sort of generous. I usually say 2,500 milligrams of salt a day. Some people say 2,000. But it's easy to get that amount of salt. And obviously
Mm.
the salty snacks. The potato chips, the peanuts, the pretzels, the skins, the popcorn. Again, you shouldn't eat a big bag of that. You've consumed probably more than your quantity of salt for the day.
Yeah. Also, sleep and stress. How big a factor are they, Dr. Fletcher?
Well, sleep and stress are important. Sleep is a restorative process. It allows your body to kind of uh, relax and slow down, and kind of it's restorative in terms of just kind of helping the body improve and heal from the busy day. So we should get 8 hours of sleep a day. Unfortunately, physicians are guilty of not getting that in many cases.
Yeah.
Uh, but so that's extremely important that we get 8 hours of sleep. Activity, we talked about 150 minutes of exercise per week. Stress, again, stress is a stimulant to the body, and the body reacts to stress by raising the blood pressure, raising the heart rate. That's sort of a natural response. For example, if somebody says fire, then our heart rates go up, our blood pressure goes up because it's preparing the body to react and to get away. So that's an appropriate response. But if we're constantly stressed by, socioeconomic issues, by just worrying about what's going on with our family members, if we live in neighborhoods where we're concerned about the safety of our families and ourselves, if we're challenged by financial issues, all of those things raise stress. Our jobs, if we're in an environment where, we're having a difficult time in terms of existing in that environment, then that can be stressful. Now, we all have stress. Again, I'll underline that there's no perfect person out there, a perfect world where we don't have some stress. And then how we manage stress. Do we internalize everything and, kind of constantly dwell on it? Or do we have means of relaxing? Do we exercise? Do we listen to music? Do we talk to friends? We all have different ways by which we can de-stress. But stress is key. And again, many times there are factors that we can't control. Again, if we're worried about our kids going to school, for example, are they going to be bullied? Are they going to be attacked? Are they going to have a hard time with the system, just kind of giving them a more difficult time to get to class or to participate on a sports team? Those are all forms of stress that we obviously have to be concerned about.
Well, letting it out doesn't mean yelling too. I want to yell at somebody, Dr. Fletcher. Can I yell at somebody?
If that's your way of letting out stress, I think that's appropriate. Don't keep it in. Exercise again, or people who kickbox or hit punching bags. Everybody
Oh
has a
yeah.
different way. Some people like to read. Some people like to go for a walk. They like to talk to special friends, listen to music. Exercise. There are many, many, many ways. Gardening is another way of releasing stress. I like to
Gardening. Wow.
get out into the yard and nice peaceful day, birds, nice weather. It's a good way to relax and take it easy.
So, Dr. Fletcher, you said kickboxing and all that stuff, and yelling is okay. So the next time I yell and knock the taste out of somebody, I'm gonna say, Dr. Fletcher said I should do that.
Well, I'd be careful about the violence part, because then you might get stressed. You might get stressed by the popo putting cuffs on you and taking you downtown. So let's not do that.
Dr. Fletcher, family history is information, not a sentence. I heard that line somewhere. What does that mean for someone whose parents had heart disease?
Well, family history is huge. I think it's important that we talk about the history of our families, the good part and the bad part. That's key. But family history often dictates to you the genetic footprint that you may inherit in terms of different types of diseases. So knowing that, people in your family have had heart disease, heart failure, hypertension, heart attack, strokes, is extremely important because it's a risk factor for us. And so knowing that history allows you to be more proactive. We should be screening and early prevention anyway. But if you have a family history, you should be focused on that. So you should definitely know those numbers. You should be screened earlier. One of the things that we didn't talk about that's important is LP little a. And LP little a
Okay.
is a blood study that checks your cholesterol levels to some degree, a little different than LDL-C. But LP little a is a genetic marker that tells us to some degree whether or not we're at higher risk for cardiovascular disease. And if that number is high, then we should focus even more on your LDL-C cholesterol. Remember, I said earlier that different disease entities and states kind of make the number that's normal or acceptable a little different. So if you have a high LP little a, for example, that's a marker that perhaps we need to be more aggressive with your LDL-C. So it's a screen. So if you come in and you have a low LP little a, that's good. You have a high LP little a, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a heart attack today or tomorrow, but it means that your risks are there. You know, it is more common, as we're looking at the early literature now, in African Americans or Black Americans. And so, again, it's a screening test that we should consider and ask for when we go to our physicians for our evaluations and our screenings. There are other certain things such as calcium scores. That's just another non-invasive way of sort of getting a feel for, what your potential risk for cardiovascular disease is. That's a
Hmm.
simple test. It doesn't involve any IVs or needles or contrast. It's a scan. Does involve some small amount of radiation. But many times people have these promotions or health fairs or screenings where you can get a calcium score, and if not, it may cost you about $100 or so, depending on where you live. A lot of insurances don't still cover it, but I think it's a good investment in your health, especially if you have a high risk in your family. So that calcium score ideally should be 0, and then anything above a 0 kind of makes us start to think a little bit. So if you have a calcium score of 50, that doesn't mean you have major coronary artery disease. But again, if we go back and look at your LDL-C cholesterol and you have a calcium score of 50, then we need to be a little bit more aggressive with that. Or if your LP little a is high and you have positive calcium score and LDL-C, is kind of maybe 100. Well, that's not a bad number if otherwise you're healthy, but that number
Right.
should be more aggressively addressed if you have an elevated calcium score and an LP little a. So those are just things we can do to screen. And again, basically the blood pressure, your weight, your glucose, those are all important too.
Yeah, and generally we go to the doctor, we listen to the doctor. Doctor asks us some questions. Doctor tends to ask, the necessary questions. But what questions should we be asking our doctors?
Well, again, the first question is, our numbers, what are they? You should know what they are. It shouldn't just be, they're okay.
Mhm.
You basically should ask your doctor, what they think your cardiovascular risks are based on the assessment, based on your history. You should basically go in and ask, to be tested for certain tests in terms of your LDL cholesterol and perhaps LP little a. If you're concerned and have a family history, ask them about a calcium score. What are their thoughts about that? And perhaps is it something that you should consider? um, you should go in and say, my blood pressure. I mean, today you said it's 150 over 80, and I'm checking it at home, and it's also 150 over 80 or better. What can we do to get that pressure down? Can we make some adjustments? You should also talk with them about your medicines. If you're having side effects, rather than just stop the medicine or just think that you have to accept that side effect, discuss those things with your provider. There are options. In many cases, there are other ways to work with that medication so it's more usable for you as an individual. So I think we need open dialogue with our providers, It's a two-way conversation. The doctor's going to be asking you things, you can ask the doctor things. The doctor's going to be telling you things, you should be telling your doctor or your provider those things. I think that's just real important. And you fit, this relationship. One doctor, you may not have good chemistry. Yeah.
Mhm.
If you have the option, find someone that's you're more comfortable with in terms of conversation and being able to get good results. You know, be prepared when you go see your physician. Don't wait until the doctor walks in the room and start pulling out your papers out of your purse or going into your phone to find what you know. Be prepared. Know what you want to ask. Know your questions. Have your medicines. If you don't have them physically with you, have them in your phone or on a piece of paper. That makes the doctor-patient experience so much more succinct. The doctor doesn't have much time in that room with you because there are a lot of people that they need to see. But at the same
Mhm.
time, you want to maximize that time, but don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, and I see we're running low on time, but this has been a great, great informative discussion as we thought it would be, Dr. Fletcher. Um, Again, let's reiterate because I think it's so important the warning signs of a heart attack or stroke that folks should never ignore. And when, Dr. Fletcher, should someone call 911 instead of driving themselves to the hospital?
So the warning signs of heart attack and stroke, unfortunately, life doesn't always read the textbook, but classically with the heart attack, you may have heaviness, fullness, tightness. Classically, we say it's in the center of the chest, but it doesn't always have to be there. It could be squeezing, it could be tight, it could be full, it could be burning, it could be aching. You may not have discomfort at all. You may have shortness of breath, you might have fatigue. The discomfort could be in your neck, your jaw, your arms. Classically, we say the left arm. It could be both arms. It could be your back. I just don't feel good. I mean, sometimes
Mhm.
that's just what you hear. I think if you know your numbers and your risk, though, and that's how we sometimes stratify if someone comes in with something that's atypical, strong family history, they're diabetic. Well, it's heart disease for us until proven otherwise. So I think
Mm.
that's key. Again, we talk about women and heart disease. Their symptoms often can be different. Some of those symptoms I just mentioned are more common in women than men. But again, women can come in with classic heaviness, fullness, tightness, elephant sitting on the chest too. But I think
Yeah.
again, looking at the whole perspective is how I think we're more successful. And then sometimes it's not your heart. Okay, it could be your stomach or
Mm.
swallowing tube. But again, it's better to err more on getting your heart checked out. But again, family history, risk factors, that helps you. Gosh, my brother had a stent when he was 50. Then, hey, I'm going to get this checked out. Even though I think it's gas, let me go get this checked out. When
Mm.
should you call 911? If your pain is severe and it's unremitting, you're sweating, you're short of breath, you call 911. If you've had a period where you're getting extremely woozy and dizzy, almost passing out, or you've actually passed out and woke up, you should call 911. The stroke symptoms, could be visual, i.e., blurred vision, blindness in one eye, numbness, paralyzed arm, legs, left side of the body, drooping face, stuttering or not able to speak. All those are some of the symptoms of stroke. Again, 911. Time is important for brain and heart. So the sooner you get to the hospital, the better options and choices we have to stop that heart attack or stop that stroke. There are medicines we can give for stroke now, or interventions or procedures we can do for stroke to stop the stroke so that you don't have significant damage and no disability in many cases. Heart attack, time is money. If we can get that artery open under 90 minutes from the door, from the time you got to the door of the hospital to the cath lab and get the artery open, that can stop the heart attack and minimize your symptoms and minimize your damage to your heart. So time is of the essence. And if you think you're having a cardiovascular issue, let us figure it out. Don't you sit there and try to diagnose what it is. I think that's the important thing that I'd share today.
Yeah, absolutely. And how can listeners, viewers, learn more about ABC and find resources or get involved in future events?
Well, we have a website, abcardio.org. So abcardio.org. And that will give you access to ABC. There are websites there with webinars. There are different topics and discussions that lay people can view. There are cookbooks on there that you can look at. You can look at the 7 Steps to a Healthy Heart. There are features there about maternal health and women's health. There's a wealth of information at that website.
Absolutely. I've been on that, obviously been on that website. And it's just a couple more quick things. You just said where they should go online. How about some local partners or just national partners that you have that are really helping to push this message?
Wow, again, I wish we had a slide. One of the things that ABC is a tremendous collaborator. We want to get this mission done, and we realize that this is not all about ABC. But clearly, we work with some of our other professional partners. The National Medical Association, or NMA, is one of our key partners. American College of Cardiology, ACC, American Heart Association, is one of our partners. We work with minority health commissions in certain states. We work with uh, um, different organizations, fraternities, sororities. The list is endless. That slide would light up this whole
Well,
series.
next time
But
we'll have a slide.
but I will say this: we're open to other collaborators. I'm going to reach out here for a moment. One of the key things that is key for me is influencers and individuals out there who are well known and appreciated. There are people out there that everybody knows their name. A good example I'll use, because this is common knowledge. What Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did for atrial fibrillation was tremendous. People come in saying, "Do you think I have that rhythm?" It personalizes it. It shows you that, everybody can have this rhythm. A celebrity, a famous person can have this rhythm. It starts the dialogue, and it makes it more important for people to understand that, hey, there's treatments for this. There's something I can do, and there are consequences if I don't do that. And so I'm reaching out to all of our influencers out there, whether you be a celebrity, an athlete, an entertainer, a corporate person, a famous coach, a famous athlete. These are individuals who can help us carry this mission. You and I, we're listened to and talked to, but boy, you put a big celebrity on here and you say, I'm going to have this person on my show tomorrow. You'd have a lot of listeners because they want to hear what that person has to say. The other thing that I'll use as another example of that is, again, common knowledge. There is a video out called Making of a Heart Attack, and that was recently released by Imogen, looking at using Mr. Barry Sanders, who we all know as a prominent professional all-pro athlete with the Detroit Lions. And he talks about his experience. He had a heart attack about a year and a half ago. He talks about his symptoms, his signs, his treatment, his outlook. And that's eye-opening. When we show that film in various circles, people are just amazed and want to know more about heart disease. So again, I encourage all your listeners, if you're influencers out there, it doesn't have to be a superstar. You may just have a big social media following. Let's talk about heart disease and stroke. Let's get out there and make this message available to all Americans, and especially people who are underserved, marginalized, and at high risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Dr. Fletcher, if you could leave listeners and viewers with one message to protect their heart, what would it be?
Know your numbers. And as I tell my friends, you say, if I ever have a heart problem, I want to come see you. I say, well, come to me the heartbeat before you need me. Then we have the best options, the best choices, and the best outcomes.
Well, there you go. And there is that making. What is the name of that? Making of a
Making
heart
of a heart
attack.
attack. Yeah, I just saw
Yeah.
your shot there 1 second ago there.
Yeah, so there you have it, folks. We certainly appreciate Dr. Anthony Fletcher of the Association of Black Cardiologists. What an organization, folks. Support them, check them out. They are doing the work that we all need done, and it's going to benefit all of us. They're in the front lines to try and benefit us. And Dr. Fletcher is right there, front and center. Dr. Fletcher, this has been great. We appreciate you. Thanks for joining. Let it be known.
Can I say one more thing?
Yep.
Like all organizations, no money, no mission. We need support. We have a capital campaign going on. So again, you can go to that website, and we certainly would appreciate you support of cardiovascular disease for all Americans. Send those dollars. We can make it happen. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. And d donate right there, folks. It's ABC. You can whatever amount. I guess it's fair to say that every little bit helps.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again, Dr. Fletcher, and thanks to the ABC folks. We appreciate you guys.
Thank you again. Let's do this again soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Dr. Anthony Fletcher, y'all. And what, again, great information, heart health, and certainly in our community too. It's just really needed. And he's right. Get some celebrities. I'm seeing numbers from several of our channels right now. It's pretty decent, but as he said, if there was a celebrity, we tend to listen. But we should listen to folks like Dr. Fletcher when it comes. This is his specialty. This is not, I mean, like you said, Kareem. This is not, their specialty. Kareem's specialty was the sky hook. Dr. Fletcher's specialty is heart health, cardiovascular health. Listen to individuals like Dr. Fletcher, folks. We certainly appreciate him and the Association of Black Cardiologists. What a organization. Support them. Go support that mission. Remember, it's www.abcardio.org, abcardio.org. And it's talk about worthy causes. This is life-saving. So let's get to it, folks, and support them. Thank you again for watching. Let it be known. We'll see you again tomorrow.